Hello, and welcome to WYO Connect, collaborative conversations, today focusing on Israel-Palestine. Our colleagues in conversation today are Paul Flesher, University of Wyoming, who is the director of the American Heritage Center and professor of religious studies. He's with Matthew J. Adams, director of the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. They are hosted by Isa Helfgott, the AVP for Global Engagement at the University of Wyoming.
Hello and welcome. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation today with Paul and Matt Adams to talk about the collaborations they have developed over the years between the University of Wyoming and the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. Could you please begin by introducing each other?
Matt, shall I start?
Yeah, please do. Keep it short.
So I want to introduce Matthew Adams, who is a professional archaeologist and historian. He earned his PhD from the State University of Pennsylvania. He's excavated in Egypt, in Israel, and in Palestine, and in recent years has been running what he calls the Jezreel. Can you say that? What's the expansion for JVRP?
Jezreel Valley Regional Project.
Yes.
Go by the acronym.
Yes, and you speak in acronyms all the time. So usually what you do is you excavate a site. So Matt is a co-director at Tel Megiddo with Israel Finkelstein. He is the co-director at Legio with Yotam Tepper and others. But he's also the director of this regional project, which brings together dozens, if not hundreds of sites within the Jezreel Valley in Israel today. And as in doing that, I should also say, he's running the American presence, archaeological presence in Israel at the Albright Institute in Jerusalem, which is where American scholars, historically almost 100% archaeologists, but more recently historians of different periods from ancient and Roman periods into the medieval and occasionally into the modern period as well. So it's an exciting place to go and to be based while you're doing research in Israel or in Palestine. It is technically located in East Jerusalem, so that actually makes it in many ways part of Palestine, at least in a historical sense. Is that enough? Did I leave anything out?
Plenty, more than enough. Thanks, Paul. And I will introduce you. Hopefully many of the viewers out there know Paul Flesher very well. He's, of course, the director of UW's American Heritage Center. He's also a professor of religious studies, and he is, I believe, the founding director of religious studies at UW, which he spent 20 years, almost 20 years?
Yeah, 21 actually is what they got me down for.
Okay, great. Yeah, which the religious studies department there being a very big presence on the UW campus. I had the opportunity to visit them a few years ago, and I was really impressed by the organization and everything that's going on. Academically, Paul is an expert in Judaism in Israel in the Roman and Byzantine periods. He's known very well for his scholarship on Targums, which is the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was probably, Paul, if you want to say more, was probably the way that Jesus himself interacted with the Hebrew Bible. Maybe.
Quite probably.
Quite probably. Good. He's been a huge scholar in that field and also paid a lot of service to that field in helping to develop the International Organization of Targum Study and one of the founder figures for the journal, which is now known as Aramaic Studies. More recently, but also going back many years in time, he's an expert on ancient synagogues, and he's currently working on several projects which seek to bring together both the historical, the liturgical, and the archaeological data into a nice package to describe these very interesting religious buildings. I met Paul I met Paul in 2016 at the Albright Institute. In fact, we probably met earlier, but this is the moment that crystallizes in my head when he spent a semester in the spring of 2016 as the Gittin Professor, which is our most prestigious fellowship at the Albright Institute, working on his project studying the acoustic qualities of these ancient synagogues and trying to reconstruct how liturgy and day-to-day activity and the architecture of these buildings really fit together into the sonic experience of participants in these ancient liturgies. Since that time, Paul has joined the Jezreel Valley Regional Project on a few of our different sub-projects, including our big survey of the Jezreel Valley. Paul has waded through some of the thorniest weeds in the valley during the heat of summer.
That's my biggest achievement.
That's right. And of course, also our excavations at the Roman Legionary base at Legio as one of the area supervisors and as the educational program coordinator. He is also, of course, the UW faculty member representative for UW's consortium relationship with the JVRP, which we'll talk a little bit about today, which provides a lot of opportunities for students and faculty in Israel.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Well, you've started, Matt, to talk a little bit about the genesis of how you met, but we're here today to talk about collaborations across institutions and countries. And I wonder if you two could talk a little bit to begin just about the ways in which you do collaborate together.
Well, should we start talking about Legio? That's the easy sort of most encapsulated aspect. As Matt was saying, historically, I'm a literature person. I'm a historian. I'm not an archaeologist, but in the last decade and a half, I've begun to learn a lot more about archaeology in order to bring it into historical and liturgical analyses. And I've worked extensively with Matt in the last 5 years on some of his projects. The most important one is this site, Legio, which is in some ways independent of, but also in the shadow of that important ancient tell Megiddo. What's important about studying, the camp of some ancient Roman legion?
That's a good question, one which we should all be prepared to answer about our research, I suppose. I think, well, first of all, for those of you out there, the site of Legio is the Roman legionary base of the Roman 6th Ferrata Legion. And it existed here in Palestine from about 120 AD to about 350 plus or minus. And this Roman legionary presence is hugely impactful for a lot of the things that we take for granted today, especially in the realm of religion. This was the occupying force by the Roman military in Judea. So when you're thinking about the revolt of the Jews against the Romans in the 1st century, or the ongoing strife between occupying forces of the Roman army and the local Jewish and later Christian population, Legio is really at the interface of that, where these Roman pagan military imperial people interact with the everyday Jews in the area. And I think that's one of the most important contributions that Paul brings to the project. He is the expert on the Jewish side of things, and we're there excavating really on a day-to-day basis the ins and outs of the Roman army, what kind of structures they built, how they administered themselves. But in order to bridge the gap into some more important narrative of the relationship between Roman imperial overlord and Judean underlords, I suppose, we have to bring those two things together and study them together.
Yeah, so it's nice to go into an area like Legio, which is a focus site the way Matt has decided to run the excavations as the primary director of the site, but it's also a huge site, for it's a Roman camp, a large Roman camp, surrounded by I'm going to say a support structure. It's a village, very large Jewish population in the village. It actually gets into the histories and the literature of the time as, you know, an important Jewish presence. But there's also Christians there. There are non-Jews there, and they all interact to support the Romans. I mean, they need bakeries, they need, you know, food supplies, they need, you know, meat and so on. So a lot of that takes place in the village and moves across the boundary from the formal Roman camp back out into the village, and then of course out into the country itself. So that Matt has been running the excavations there, and I've been able to work with him and his co-directors and other team members at this very exciting spot, and really getting a sense of just how the Romans did these kinds of things, and what we're talking about when we say, oh, there's the Roman army. The camp is sort of a misnomer. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, in our publications and other, you know, public facing things, we try to use the term legionary base, because a camp, especially in English, just implies a temporary structure. But this was something that lasted for 2 centuries. It was a compound that measured roughly 500 by 300 yards. So it's basically a city in its own right. It housed 5,000 plus soldiers plus administrative personnel. It had a huge villa for the legionary commander. It was essentially a city. And as Paul rightly described, around this formal city grew up very organically a village that might be called a city in its own right at one point in time, of hangers-on, you know, people to supply all of this food, prostitutes, all these kinds of things that a good army needs.
So I'm getting a nice sense of the physical nature of the collaboration that you two have worked on together, sort of in situ at the site. And I understand, though, Matt, that you've also visited the University of Wyoming, and I know, Paul, that you've spent time in residence at the Albright Institute. I wonder if you want to talk about the way that work in the field spills over into the other work that you do.
Sure. One of the things that Matt's excavations have done, in fact, all of Matt's excavations take this, at least where he can find the money, is he works with cutting edge technology. There's a lot of LiDAR exploration. There's a lot of 3D mapping and imaging going on. And that in many ways spills over to UW, and the UW has had a lot of conversations and has some institutes for 3D imaging. And, you know, while its anthropology department works here in the United States rather than having a presence internationally, you know, they are also trying to work with a lot of this cutting edge technology. And a lot of what Matt has been doing, you know, is really sort of trying to trailblaze with a lot of this stuff. Matt, you want to say something a little more specific about
Sure.
your interests and what you've been trying to pull off?
Yeah, I think the collaboration between Paul and I, and more broadly, the project in UW, has been really fruitful in making connections with other UW scholars. So Paul introduced me in the last visit that I had there to the folks at the Shell 3D Visualization Center. And we had some really great conversations about what we were trying to do in the field and what they were trying to do in the lab, and how we could try to bring these different types of data together and do something, you know, more collaborative and over and above what we were each doing independently. And that's still a work in progress, but I'm really excited about that particular opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that's exciting about the 3D part, at least from an archaeological perspective, is that in other digs that I've been on, the square supervisor in charge of a 5 by 5 meter area every day draws what the surface looks like, what's been excavated, and fills in any things that's been found or locations of particular finds that have been removed, pieces in stones for a structure and so on, does it all by hand. And one of the things that Matt has pioneered with his excavations is doing this every day to create a 3D image, so that somebody walks across or through or around is technically the right word, taking a series of photographs, which the computer then generates an exact 3D image of. It's accurate enough that you can actually do measurements, and it also records elevation, so you can see the series of photographs, et cetera. And it allows you to read it, right?
That's right. I mean, archaeology, as we are always fond of telling our students, is inherently destructive. To excavate a site, you have to dissect it, and there's nothing left when you're done. So as the dissector, you have a grave responsibility to document exactly what you've taken apart. And for the last 200 plus years of archaeology, that method of recording what you're taking apart has not changed. You draw a picture of it. Usually you draw a plan view and sort of a cut section view. And that's wholly inadequate, especially by modern standards. If you really want to document where almost every single grain of sand, every artifact you find, every stone, we have the technology to do that in our day-to-day lives. I can now do it on my iPhone 12 very nicely. But the idea is that we harness this 3D technology in order to create a far more accurate picture of what we've destroyed and preserve it for future generations.
Yeah, and it's not just the preservation that's important, it's the fact that it's accurate enough that you can actually base new analyses on it.
That's right.
It's, if the excavator, one of the things that I've learned is that the goal of excavation is, of course, to produce the final report. And many archaeologists sort of see that as the goal, and that's the point at which they can sort of say, okay, I'm done with my responsibilities for this site. But for everybody who didn't dig there, that's just the beginning. And that kind of record needs to be as detailed as possible with as complete data of the excavation as possible for later people to work and think and analyze. And that's what I find important, because my own research about ritual and acoustic character of synagogue structures and so on depends on the final report that people produced. Some sites, people try to preserve them, but the preservation, of course, winds up being a reconstruction in some ways. So even if you can get to the site, see what's there, it often is not representative of what was originally there. It's the excavation reports that are so important for that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the other thing that Matt has been doing, of course, is he's been the director of the Albright Archaeological Institute, which is the base for American excavators coming in and out of Israel, doing activities. And it's the site of all sorts of collaboration. It provides resources and laboratories, libraries, and it's in an area with other resources and libraries and so on. But do you want to talk a little bit about how the Albright functions as a base, as a place from which collaboration takes place?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. That's a good point. The Albright's been around since 1900, and we were originally founded by a group of biblical scholars from the United States who suddenly had this realization that, hey, we're teaching our students about the Bible and we expect them to understand the Bible, but most of them may never go there. So let's set up an organization in the Holy Land and send our students there to get that full immersive experience. Now, we have moved far beyond biblical studies. The Albright's mission now encompasses every time period from now back in time to the beginning of human history. And it's gone far beyond the Holy Land to to emphasize the greater region of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean. So when scholars come here, first of all, we usually have a base of 15 to 20 scholars who come on their own funding. These are people who's either working on their PhD all the way up to senior scholars, as Paul was when he was here. And all these different disciplines, they're sitting here living together. We're paying for them. We're feeding them. We're housing them. They have nothing to do but do their research and talk to one another. And that's where the important things start to happen. When you get people like Paul, who is doing his synagogue research, and he's meeting with somebody for dinner every night who's working on Paleolithic stone tools, and someone else who's studying Ottoman tax records. When these people start talking, they're effectively collaborating right away and almost instantly impacting one another's scholarship. I think that's what the Albright does best, is provide a venue for these kinds of people. And I would throw into the mix there undergraduates and graduate students as well. We've been expanding recently into internship opportunities, which allow, a freshman, sophomore, junior, whatever, come to the Albright and get a little bit of piece of that collaborative experience as well.
Yeah, there's a sense of, excitement. It's like going to Los Alamos or something. If you're a nuclear research scientist, there are people there who know what you do. They are experts in their version of it or their area of expertise, but you share a lot of interests and questions and historical approaches and archaeological insights, and you collaborate, and you just, and it starts off, you're talking about an area of history that, okay, I don't know anything about Paleolithic, anything. And you start having conversations and you realize, oh, they're trying to study the same human activities that I am. It's just that those activities result in stone tools as opposed to wooden tools or paintbrushes, and they treat their animals differently. They, maybe they hunt rather than, husband animals, but, the butchery methods are very similar, for example. And so you learn all these exciting things, and particularly when you bring, there's always going to be graduate students around, people working towards PhDs, people finishing up masters, trying to think about whether they want to go the extra mile or for a doctorate, or maybe they just want to say, okay, I've got to earn a living here. And they get excited, they're interested, they listen, they have a little bit of expertise they've been learning, so they often contribute as well. And then with this intern, we often leave undergraduates out of these conversations. And as Matt says, bringing in interns, undergraduate as interns, bringing in the people that you have in your digs, many of whom are undergraduates, and they're excited, but they're usually out in the digs. And when you can bring them into the Albright, and it's not just, the people at their own excavations that they get to listen to and ask questions of, but in related areas, and so on. And that's where people, as Matt has said, have life-changing experiences, decide this is something I want to do. I want to get involved here. I understand how this works. I can make my brain think in these ways. And it's just a real exciting place. And it's also comfortable. The Albright was, as the building was built in the 1920s, is essentially a compound. It takes up almost a whole square block. The building itself, houses library and kitchen and dining hall and rooms and so on. But it's around a nice open courtyard with a fountain and trees and et cetera. And people gather there and they talk and chat, and it's where a lot of things happen. The Albright organizes coffee and tea, and that sounds sort of almost British and sort of cute, but it's a moment. Okay, let's leave the library. Let's go talk to each other, in a relaxed way for 20 minutes, a half an hour before we go back and try to work on the article or go back to the lab and do some pottery analysis. So that's an exciting kind of a place.
It really strikes me how the range of the way you talk about your collaborations ranges from something that might have happened at the Albright 100 years ago, sitting and discussing the world of ideas and discoveries on the one hand, to real new cutting edge technological applications of new technologies and new methodologies. It's really exciting. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the student experience. You've both mentioned student interns at the Albright, and I know you've had student participation, I believe, at the excavation at Legio. Could you talk a little bit about what it might look like for a UW student to participate in either of those activities?
Sure, I'll start. Okay. Yeah, I'm a strong believer. I think the Albright as an institution is a strong believer in people interacting with people. I mean, you can stay at home in your dorm and you can study for every test and you can go to all the classes and do your thing, but you really got to get out there and experience things. And that's what both of these programs do. On the excavation project, we run the entire project, in fact, as a field school. And most of the participants are undergraduates from the United States or Europe and other places as well, or interested regular folks. The students come on the excavation usually for about 4 weeks, although the timing does vary. And, you know, we make it pretty grueling for them. It's like a summer camp. It's fun and hardworking, and they're completely immersed in archaeology almost every minute, and not just passive students watching a PowerPoint lecture. These people are doing the archaeology from day one. We throw them right into the field. They start digging, and we're there watching them, trying to help them understand what they're doing and interpreting the kinds of things that they're finding. And in that way, we take them pretty much through all of the basics of fieldwork, through all of the technology, the intellectual background of what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, how our research questions guide where we're digging and why we're digging. On top of that, we also, and Paul was very instrumental in setting this up at Legio recently, we also run a more formal academic lecture program, which takes place in the evening. So they're kind of getting this academic support while they're getting this field technique support all at the same time. And it's really, really fun to go and play in the dirt for a few weeks, hang out with a bunch of people from all over the world. At Legio, we have up to 70 people there, including staff and students. At Megiddo, one of the other excavations, you know, I think our record is 130 people. So imagine, you know, all of these people with all these different interests, but focusing for one short period of a few weeks on archaeology in a summer camp kind of setting. It's huge. The learning potential is tremendous. The impact that this experience has on these people's lives is tremendous. We still get emails from students we had 20 years ago, you know, reminiscing about their time here and how this impacted what they did. So that's the field school. The intern opportunities at the Albright are a little bit lower key in the sense that there's less people involved and less physical labor. But it's a similar idea. This time, the undergraduates are a minority in a group that is mostly, you know, tried and true scholars, and in many cases, senior scholars. And the undergraduates aren't experiencing the same teacher-student relationship that they do at the university. Here, they're having dinner with them, they're having lunch with them, they're sitting beside them in the library, they're eavesdropping on high-level conversations about who knows what. I think that that's also a really fundamental experience for these students.
Great, and maybe you can just talk about, are all the students who work with you at the Albright experienced archaeology students as well, or are there options for students in other disciplines?
Really good question. Both at the Albright and in our field projects, anyone can come. And we've had, you name the type of person and what their real life is like, we've had them. from undergraduate students who are hardcore serious about archaeology and here to prove that they can do it, to undergraduates who haven't chosen a major yet and still looking for, some inspiration, to, stay-at-home moms or working lawyers. We've had everybody, and they all take something different from this. So no, we welcome everybody, and we think that this experience benefits both us as an institution and a research project, as well as the people who get involved.
Great. Well, I know the University of Wyoming and the Albright Institute are working together on a new program where we hope to develop a cohort of faculty who maybe, like all of those students from different backgrounds, come to the Albright with different disciplinary expertise, different levels of experience, and to advance their own collaborative research and individual research. And I wonder if you two could talk a little bit about what you see as the opportunities in that project and what you hope for it.
Why don't I start with this one? So the idea is to have to develop a cadre of faculty to do a long-term annual course for students. And in simple terms, the idea is simply to put together 2 faculty members from different disciplines, anthropology and geology, history, and law, any random grouping, and then take advantage of what is there in Israel, what is there in Jerusalem and Palestine and East Jerusalem, and take the students on a 3-week course once a year to do an experience and learn different things. I mean, we'll tap into the archaeological stuff, we'll tap into the history, but we'll also, spend some time perhaps in Israel sciences, or look at the art that it's done. Israel's a modern country. Perhaps we'll have a professor of architecture who will look at the modern architecture alongside, some of the ancient medieval buildings that are still there. So there's a variety of different ways of putting these together. And the idea is to begin with a base at the Albright for the first week or so, and have the 2 faculty members sort of introduce the students to Jerusalem, to the surrounding areas, places that can be accessed easily from Jerusalem, and then perhaps over the coming couple of weeks, branch out to other places in Israel and make other connections. So that's the idea, and then to have a cadre of faculty members who can do different flavored courses in Israel once a year. And at the moment, we're looking at a January term kind of a thing, and the Albright provides a nice home away from home for that kind of thing.
So we can extend the collaborative approach to research both among faculty at UW and crossing over that boundary between research and teaching, which of course we all in this field know that those 2 things are very much intertwined with each other.
Yeah. And one of the nice things about working with the Albright is the Albright has both a geographical and an intellectual position within Israel, within Palestine, and it forces the people who are on the course, the students, to participate. Albright is actually located slightly to the east of the Green Line in the Palestinian area of Jerusalem. But it's readily accessible to the west side of what used to be called the Green Line, and quite walkable. Jerusalem is very much, or at least the center of Jerusalem is very much a walkable city. And the other thing that's great about the Albright is that it is well connected with the academic and intellectual institutions, both local and international. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Matt?
Yeah, Paul's right. Our history here and the fact that we are not Israeli, and not Palestinian, that to some degree, since we're American, but more importantly, since we are a nonprofit organization that is apolitical and a-religious, we stand outside of the conflict in a lot of ways here. So we can exist and transmit that existence to people who stay at the Albright outside of the conflict and allow our people to kind of observe it independently. That has to do with our geographic location as well, as Paul said. In that same vein, we have also over 121 years established connections with everybody else that's here, whether they're Israeli institutions or individuals, Palestinian institutions or individuals, the wide variety of religious organizations that are both local and international here in Jerusalem, other archaeological schools, other scientific schools of different backgrounds. There's a German school just down the street for archaeology, and there's a French Institute for Cultural Studies just down the way. We have been able to develop relationships with all of these people. And so whatever faculty members UW sends here, we have connections to place them with like-minded individuals that I think would advance their own scholarship and teaching.
Yeah, and we can also, the course can also invite them to come in, perhaps for an afternoon tour or class or, intellectual stuff. There's a lot of cutting edge scientific stuff going on in Israel, both in archaeology, which is what we've been talking about, but in a variety of areas. There are leaders in COVID research. There are leaders in a variety of other scientific and health related areas. We, depending on the interests of the different faculty members leading the student study tours, there will be access to them and the use of the local country, not just in terms of the physical geographical space, but in terms of the people and their abilities and their expertise there. So often we think of this is a tour of the Holy Land, and we go to the historical, we go to the religious, but this is also a cutting edge scientific country. There's a lot of exciting research going on here in many, if not all areas. And it's great to come here and introduce people. This is also a cutting edge place for agriculture. There's a lot of problems with dry farming, and it's an arid place, very similar set of problems to Wyoming. And it has approached them and solved them in different ways. And Wyoming and its agricultural people can learn from that, and vice versa, I am sure. So there's a lot of, we hope, just to think in terms of timing, we're going to be training some of the faculty at the start of 2022. We've gotten pushed back a little bit because of COVID, and we hope to have our first student cohort early in 2023. Right now, we're all chomping at the bit. We've been ready to go for months, and unfortunately, COVID is still, closing borders and so on. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to start getting ready by the end of the summer, start doing some planning, start making some official connections and organizations. But it'll take a little while to get going, but we're really excited to be launching UW in Jerusalem fairly shortly, at least in terms of, if not in terms of days, in terms of months.
That's great. Well, you beat me to the punch, Paul, too, in your discussion of some of the maybe surprising connections between Wyoming and Israel. Matt, is there anything you want to add on that front before we close?
Specific connections between Wyoming and Israel. I'm sure there are many. None of them come to mind, but I am a firm believer in the importance of places, and where we are in Israel, Palestine, it has importance. Of course, Wyoming has importance, and those two different importances are not mutually exclusive. I mean, faculty and student disciplines from any range can come to a place like Israel-Palestine at the Albright and find something that really fits for them.
Well, thank you. Sorry.
Isa, before you stop, you've been focusing the conversation on us and our collaboration, but let me talk a bit about you and what your organization, Global Engagement, enables. One of the reasons why Matt and I have been talking about archaeology and excavations and tours and taking classes here is because Wyoming, the University of Wyoming, wants to send its students abroad. And the Global Engagement Office in its various ways has funding to help students travel. It has the expertise to help students find trips and things that they would be interested in. But if a student from UW would like to come to do excavations at Legio or Megiddo or participate in this study tour or some other study tour, your office has resources to help them, yes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Wyoming is a global university. We aspire to make international connections for all of our students, all of our faculty, any member of our community who wants to engage in the world. And it's really these individual person-to-person connections that make those possibilities realities for our faculty and our students. We have students from all over the world who study in degree programs and as short-term students at the University of Wyoming. We send our students any place they want to go. And that's pretty much every place. And so I think that one of the unique things about our university is that we're a pretty, we're a go-getter community, and these opportunities, when they're made available to faculty and to students, there's a lot of enthusiasm and uptake, and there's been a lot of enthusiasm about this new cohort and this new potential bigger scale collaboration between UW and the Albright among the faculty. And I'm really confident that we're going to have a tremendous amount of really transdisciplinary student interest in this project. So really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this and participating. I think I want to sign up as a student intern just to participate in those conversations. Thank you, Matt and Paul, for your time today. This has been just a wonderful conversation, ranging a wide gamut of things that are possible when people come together to work across geographic regions and across disciplines and across technologies. So very pleased to have the opportunity to talk with you today. And Matt, I look forward to deeper engagement between the Albright and the University of Wyoming, inspired by this conversation. And students, if you're listening, get in touch with us and we'll connect you to these amazing student opportunities.